All right, saying we're live. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows. If you like what we're doing and would like to help support the show, visit patreon.com/afteractionproject. If you'd like to throw us some free support and appreciation, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review on iTunes. This is the most redundant intro in podcast land. Tonight's episode, just like every episode, is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network. Be sure to check out the other great podcasts on the Firearms Radio Network by visiting firearmsradio.tv. Tonight, we are joined by Dan Smith, a Centrifuge training, and a couple of his RDS Instructor students, Blake and Bishop. We're going to get into the meat of that in just a few minutes. Before we do that, Andy, why don't you tell us what you've been up to in the last few, days, weeks, months since we've been MIA?
Well, I think it's been 742 days since we've been back on the podcast. So, man, there's a lot that's happened. First thing I want to just start out with, Jeremy and I both lost some loved ones here this year recently. I lost my father July 3rd, and Jeremy just lost his brother here about a week ago. So my condolences to you there, Jeremy. I know it's tough, but I'm glad to have all of us back on the podcast and have you back here. So as far as firearms related, got into reloading last year, got lucky right before COVID and ordered a 750 Dillon and was hardcore about getting primers. And Jeremy and I was just kind of mad dash to buy everything we could. So we've been able to get through this slump so far. I'm hoping primers come back soon, but learn how to reload. Took a few classes. Tactical conference in Dallas was the most recent one. Looking for Tim Herron's 2-day practical shooting here in a couple weeks. So just trying to continue my training and, get better every day. So how about you, Jeremy? What you doing?
Been on the range quite a bit with some students of ours. Was able to shoot a few rounds. We were pretty lucky with some of the primer grabs and ammo grabs last year through COVID. So that was pretty cool, but nothing much. Nothing much between then and now. Nothing out of the normal or usual. But let's get into the show tonight, man. Let's get into the show. Dan, talk to us a little bit about your background. I know that you've been a police officer for about a decade, K9 handler. You're the firearms instructor for your department as well as your regional SWAT team. So talk to us a little bit about you, what got you into firearms and all that good stuff.
Oh yeah. Again, thank you for having me on. I really, really appreciate it. And man, I'm truly sorry for the loved ones that you guys lost, man. I know there's nothing easy about that. That being said, man, so I've been copping for 14 years now for one department up here in the Pacific Northwest. Prior to that, I was in the Marine Corps for a little bit. Drove tanks, which has like a little bit to do with firearms, but prior to that, grew up in a Navy family, and really didn't shoot guns. Like I was a Boy Scout, so shot like 22s every now and then at scout camp, but really didn't touch a gun until I was 18, and really got into it probably about 2005 when my unit deployed to Iraq. So I spent 2005 in Fallujah and running convoy security, and we were one of the first units into Iraq that had ACOGs. So that was like my introduction to sighting system, like a new sighting system outside of irons. Fast forward, came back, finished school, got into police work at like 2008, around 2007, 2008. And then from there, a couple years in, I ended up on the SWAT team, and I've been doing that since 2012. I'm now in charge of my team's firearms program. Somehow, I don't. If you just look back, you're like, man, I don't know how I ended up here sometimes. But when it comes to like red dots on pistols, though, probably 6 years ago, I bought like my first gun that was cut for an RDS. Made a whole bunch of mistakes learning from it. About 4 years ago, I went in front of the chief. I'm like, hey, chief, we're ready to take the next step. I want to get this approved for carrying on duty use. And the chief was like, okay, well, that seems like such a great idea. Let's do that for everybody. And so from there, we had a whole bunch of people in the department that are like, hey, we want to carry red dots on guns. So I had to like scramble and create some training. And when I sat down, I was like, okay, it took me a couple of years to get to this point. lessons learned. Every time I was like, man, I wish someone had told me that. Started writing that down, and that formed the basis of the class. And then a couple years ago, I started teaching with Will, who's the owner, lead instructor for Centrifuge training. And then while we were out teaching beekeeping instructor for Michigan State Patrol, he offered me the job to come on and teach red dots for Centrifuge. So I created a red dot instructor class and kicked it off Mother's Day weekend, 2018, and or 2019, Mother's Day 2019, and then 2020 class picked up steam somehow through COVID, which was cool. And then 2021, it's been we were able to bump it up to 3 days. And that's my primary class. I teach high-risk vehicle stops as well for Centrifuge, and then I'll do VSCB instructor, help Will, Brian, Chase with those classes as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Let's kick it over to Bishop. Give us a little bit about your background, and then what got you into this class.
So I don't have all the dates dialed in like Dan does. I kind of lose track of things. But roughly 3 years or so in law enforcement, currently assigned to CID, working property. And then I do part-time SWAT. I've been doing that for about a year and a half now. Before that, I did a small stint in the Army National Guard as infantry. But now coming to the law enforcement side of things, most agencies don't like to move quickly when new technology comes out, even though this seems like it's old stuff at this point. So took it kind of on my shoulders to kind of try to bring some of this stuff back. And after reviewing different RDS programs that were out there, I found the Centrifuge one. Happy I took it just because of the wealth of knowledge that you have to bring back. And like he said, you learn from his mistakes as opposed to having to do it on your own. So taking the shortcut, that's for sure. And right now with where my agency is currently at with the RDS stuff is they're not buying it for anyone or pushing it out, but they're not stopping people from going out, buying their own slides and stuff, and they're allowing them to mount them up themselves. We don't have a set policy in place yet, but I'm sure we'll get into it later on. His class is also great for that. It aids with some other department policies and whatnot. So it gives you a good structure on where to start. So basically the reason I signed up for this one was to kind of get the ball rolling on starting the ground up work for implementing the RDS at our agency.
Nice. And then Blake, why don't you do the same for us?
All right, cool. So I've been a cop about 10 years in North Carolina. Kind of went through the gamut, patrol, CID. Recently just finished up a couple years supervising our narcotics task force. As of about a week ago, sitting in a full-time training position now, so that's pretty groovy. Been kind of doing the training thing part-time since about 2014. Like I said, recently just switched into a full-time training gig, and kind of with the law enforcement training at my agency, I also do an in-service training for our 6 western counties. So that kind of brought me as kind of the new dude to bring to show all the old dinosaurs maybe some new technology or new ways to do things. And RDS being relatively new, we don't have any agencies in the West here issuing RDS yet. So it's kind of why I looked out for Dan's course and went to it earlier in the year, and kind of looking forward to helping some of these agencies get an RDS program established. So I'm not very good at an introduction, but that's me.
Solid enough. You know, I spoke to Lee Weems. I don't know if you guys know who he is. Pretty good, great guy. Law enforcement, taking all kinds of courses all over the United States. And I mentioned in one of the Facebook instructor pages, I said, man, I expect to see law enforcement with RDS all over in the future. And he messaged me, and he kind of disagreed at the time. And I don't know if he's changed his stance since then. But, you know, I asked him, you know, why don't you think that RDS is going to be popular for law enforcement, being that there's so many advantages, I think, for law enforcement, along with civilians, obviously. But, you know, finances is one of them. Training is the other one. What do you guys think about that? I'll start with you, Block A.
Block A, not the first time I heard that. Yeah. So, you know, I think it's just there's a resistance to change. I mean, I think we throw a bunch of excuses at it, whether it be, you know, budget reasons or training or whatever. But I think it's just kind of a cultural resistance to change. And it seems like if it's ever tech based, there's even more of a resistance. I would say that, I run training for a 100-man agency, and there's probably one other dude other than myself that's even ever shot a handgun with red dot sight on it. So, and maybe that's a little bit just where I'm located at, but I think it's just boils down to, again, a resistance to change.
Before we get too far into the class, I wanted to last year was a year of COVID. And then Dan, you had talked about through that, the enrollments in the class kind of took off and picked up. Talk to us a little bit about that. What training was like for you with COVID? Did you have a lot of the same struggles that they probably saw on the civilian side of training, or did you guys get a pass being a governmental training agency?
So initially, yes. So especially like when the country was in lockdown, because it's a primary law enforcement class, there would be a bunch of agencies that are like, hey, it's an LE range, it's LE only, we're essential employees, like dudes have to come to work anyways. So they were still willing to host. You had a couple agencies did back out. We had the hardest part was like we could get a core group, like the host and generally everyone from that region, they would be fine because they're already working together on a normal, like a everyday basis. So they were fine with that, and most people didn't have any problem with me coming in. After that though, like our roster through Centrifuge was crazy. So we basically, like, right from the beginning said, hey, if you can't make it, whatever happens, like your department says you can't go to training because of COVID, or you get COVID, you're exposed, whatever, like you will have the choice. You can either bounce to another class, or we'll refund your money right then and there. And like our roster, all of a sudden, man, it just went. So I ended up with, as stuff started to open up, especially towards the end of the year, we would end up with classes that were scheduled or slated to be 14, 15 students would be 20, 25 students. Because guys were like, hey, I couldn't make this class is a couple hours away. So they'd end up showing for that one. And yeah, it was, I felt for our admin gal, man. Her name's Angela. She's a freaking saint, man. She was able to keep all that on track for us. But like I said, being a majority of it law enforcement classes, I don't think I taught any open enrollment till September, October of 2020, where stuff was starting to open back up. So it was, I'm sure you guys saw, like local cats, it was fine. Contract classes were fine because they were already working together. We had to do, we made sure it was outdoor ranges only. Classrooms were like moving all the time, so you had to space everybody out. So you, like, what would be their normal like range classroom, they're like, hey, we've got to book this auditorium to keep everybody 6 feet apart. So it was a logistical nightmare, but at the same time able to at least get training done. Like once we got to the outdoor range, everybody was kind of spread out, and got away with no COVID exposures at a Centrifuge class. So that was solid. Dudes got it after, like, before and afterwards, but there's nothing at class. Yeah, great. It was like I've only fielded one phone call. They're like, hey man, we think we got exposed just after class. I'm like, just after class? What? And he came, and it turns out it'd been like a couple weeks after class, and then he like got symptoms and tested positive, and we're like, nobody else. So yeah. Like I said, it was logistically a nightmare. But very fortunate to be able to still teach classes in 2020, that's for sure.
There was a point in time last year where we weren't able to have more than 5 people on the outdoor range total. I'm talking there was ranges where you can get 50, 60 guys 5 or 6 feet apart. Yeah. Didn't matter. No more than 5 people.
Yeah.
It was a few months, but got through it, and hopefully we continue to stay on the upside of this thing to where it's not shutting down the country again. Talk to us a little bit about the minimum requirements for a candidate for this course. Is it LE only? And then we'll get into the gear requirements.
Oh, sure, sure. So, some minimum requirements. It's geared towards law enforcement. It's not LE only. The only time you end up with like an LE only tag on it, it is from the host, right? So, if a police range is hosting it and they're not going to bring in, they're not going to let like civilians on that police range, then I can't make that one open enrollment. If a range hosts me that is an open open range, then it'll absolutely be an open enrollment class. So, usually Homestead's really good about that. A couple of California classes have been pretty decent about that as well. So again, it comes down to the range on whether it'll be LE only or for civilian. When it comes to prerequisites or what you're looking to get out of it, because it's an instructor level class, I do expect guys to be in there to have some sort of instructor background. They may not have all the experience they need for red dots, but I do expect some like instructor background, because that's who it's geared towards, right? This isn't a introduction to red dot pistols. This isn't, I'm going to teach you how to be an instructor overall. I'm going to isolate in the class instructor fundamentals specific to teaching red dots, right? So if you've never taught ever before, for some of it, these may be like brand new principles for you. For those that, because it's already overwhelming enough, and like Blake and Bishop will attest to this, is when I'm talking at the start of class and doing introductions, it's especially on the LE side, guys know they need the experience, like they need training and experience in order to implement these programs back at their department. But the only way they get it is going to an instructor level class, and if the instructor's like, you need training and experience before you come here, they're like, well, how do I get the training and experience needed, right? So there's a couple things I do in class to help mitigate that. If you've never shot a red dot before and you show up to class, like we can make do with that. It's just a question of like your teaching style that may lag you behind the most in the class. So,
What's
I
the
think that
minimum?
answers it.
Yeah, it did. It absolutely did. What's the minimum gear requirement? How many rounds are they shooting?
So it's right now it's 3 days. Round count's about 1,000, just over. I think what we shoot in Tuscaloosa, Blake? Just over 1,000.
Yeah, I believe that's about right.
Yeah. So it's 1,000 to 1,200 at the most. For gear, what you'll need to bring is, hey man, I need a red dot equipped pistol and a holster for it to go in. Magazines, whatever, medical gear, of course, and then note-taking material, and now I'm having guys bring PPE, so for force-on-4 stuff, so face mask, throat, groin, because the last half of the third day is spent doing force-on-paper drills with UTM guns.
Nice.
Yep. So pretty, like, when it comes to equipment, it's pretty minimalist. So because it's really about getting into the nuts and bolts of shooting a red dot.
Do you restrict any kind of holsters like the Serpa, being that it's a law enforcement and those are still out there?
Oh man, I haven't seen Serpas in a while.
Those guys aren't taking classes.
Yeah, right.
True.
You know, I will say, like, they do need to have a holster for they need a holster designed for the gun. So don't be throwing a Glock and some Blackhawk staccato holster or some shit. Right? Like, so
we all got
and the most. Yeah. So and then you know, I've had a couple guys show up. They're like, hey man, can I run this appendix? And I'll like, I don't mind them showing up, but if their fundamentals suck, like I'll have them either switch or like, if generally it's on the first day. I haven't had to. Usually when someone asks, like, hey man, can I run this concealed? Like, their fundamentals are pretty, like, solid, so I'm not never too worried about that. So, and it's certainly like you can run a concealed carry the entire time, and I don't think you'd be held back by anything that we do.
Awesome, Blake. I want to get your opinion on who this class is best for. What does that RDS instructor candidate look like? And with that, who are the guys that come in and really excel in that class from your experience in that course?
So I'm not sure I can directly answer who it's best for, but I will say in comparison to other instructor courses, so highlighting that, you know, obviously this is a good course for instructors. You know, Dan does a really good job on the course development side of this thing, and it's not like a lot of instructor level courses are more of like an advanced course. Like, hey, the basic version of the course, maybe we're going to shoot 500 rounds, and maybe the instructor version, we're just gonna do it better and shoot 1,000. Not the case with this RDS instructor course. Dan's done a really good job at kind of putting all the pieces together for dudes that are going to be rolling out an RDS program. So you've got the focus on equipment, policy, admin, and kind of the lessons he's learned trying to implement that in his own agency. So it's not necessarily just the shooter dude that's getting the stuff out of this. There's dudes that show up to class that may kind of, they're a firearms guy, but maybe they're sitting in more of an admin role, and I think it's designed pretty well for everybody. And end user. I mean, if you were to be an end user, show up to this course and not really have much intent on ever teaching, there's a lot of things in there as far as performance goes that's going to be beneficial. Don't know if that answers your question either, but
No, it did.
I'm not podcast number 1, by the way.
Possibly. Hey, you're doing great. You're doing much better than I am. So
yeah,
I want to kick it back to Dan before I have a question for Bishop. But Dan, who is the class not for?
Who is the class not for? I don't know how to answer that question. I would say the class would not be for someone who doesn't want to be there. You know what I mean? Like, if they're being mandated to go, they're not really into training, they're not into improving themselves or others, they're probably not going to have a good time, because I'm going to have them working with another shooter, helping diagnose fundamentals. I'm going to hold them accountable with accuracy standards. I'm a pretty laid back dude. I'm not I don't yell, scream, put down, do anything like that. I try to have a pretty positive vibe on the range. And if you're forced to be there, like, I can be the most positive dude in the world, man, you're probably just not going to have a good time. So, but everything, man, from, and I would say the novice shooter, man, like, you have a brand new concealed carry permit and a Springfield Hellcat sitting in your Serpa holster. Probably not for you, right? A lot of the stuff I'm teaching is I mean, you'll be a good example for us to like work on and help fix fundamentals, but I think the class would be a little overwhelming for concepts and accuracy standards. They won't have really any context to what I'm talking, like when I'm talking about, like, hey, this is these are the little things that we're trying to diagnose, and this is what your wrist does when you're embracing that wobble. This is what it looks like when they're trying to like get the wobble to stop. And folks are like, not sure what he's talking about in general, because I'm not sure what a trigger is. Like that dude, not this class, not for you. So
makes sense. Bishop, I want you to talk to us a little bit about the flow of the class. What does it look like after the the range safety brief, the medical brief, and all that good stuff? What are you? How's that look like on day? Or what does that look like on day 1?
So the best part, in my opinion, is you get to shooting pretty quick, which is nice. It's nothing worse than showing up to a shooting class and waiting forever to start shooting, like the end of the day. So he knocked out the classroom portion first, but man, it is pretty short. Kind of goes over everything briefly, some department policy things, signing paperwork, all the boring stuff. And I'd say we were out at the range within 2 hours or less. It didn't seem very long. Yeah, it didn't seem very long. So after that, it was pretty much, we went straight to shooting. But the shooting in the beginning was paired with the instructing side of things, which is odd because you realize how much you learn by having to learn how to teach people. You learn how to shoot better at the same time. So it's pretty nice, man. It's a quick progression. But a ton of information, so I wouldn't mind going again.
What was your struggle, Bishop, in the class?
So So when we started, every time my issue for whatever reason is every time he comes around me when it's my time to shoot, I'll do great prior to him showing up. He shows up, I look over my shoulder, I'm like, oh man, he's watching me. Here we go. Start this drill. Ran it clean every time. He's watching me. It's dumpster fire, man. Dumpster fire. I can't find the dot. Rounds are going everywhere. It's disaster. Just disaster.
God, how that little tiny bit of pressure of the instructor over your shoulder just like ruins everything. It's kind of like a beep in a timer, right? On a competition.
Yeah.
He seemed to enjoy
it. Well,
yeah, he's laughing.
First time's a fluke. First time's a fluke is one thing, but it was a pattern. It was hilarious because it got to the point where I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna the whole time doesn't waste. I'm gonna start on the right end of the line next to him. And then just let it be a dumpster fire. Then I'm going to start working down the line towards the other students and let them recover.
It's a good time.
Yeah, I was Bishop's coach in Homestead, so that's absolutely true. He did fine when Dan wasn't around. Yeah,
when it didn't count.
Yeah.
Blake, what was your struggle?
Homestead, Florida is a little bit warmer than Franklin, North Carolina. So that was my struggle, really. But no.
Swamp ass?
What's that?
Swamp ass?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Bugs, all kinds of stuff that I didn't appreciate. But no, I hadn't really done a lot of precision distance work with the RDS pistol. And Dan liked B8s. So I got humbled by B8s pretty quick. So I guess that was my struggle.
Yeah, as they do, right? So
Yeah.
how far out do you shoot, man?
25 for B8s. We do a distance progression, working support hand, then strong hand, then two hands on the gun. And so it's 15, 20, 25 yards for precision. And then if the range allows it, we didn't do it in Homestead, but we were able to do it in Tuscaloosa, where they had steel. And we walked back to, it was 125 yards ring and steel out at Tuscaloosa. So, like I said, as the range allows, we'll do a walk back drill, build confidence at distance, but a bunch of the precision stuff will be out at 25.
Nice. Bishop, what were you shooting?
So that class, I had a Gen 5 Glock 17 with the new Timney trigger. It's essentially not a Glock anymore at that point with that trigger. Not sponsored content.
Love it.
Absolutely love that trigger, man.
What about you, Bishop?
Balake.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so no, it's good. What was I shooting in Homestead? I think Homestead I was shooting a Triarch Gen 4 Glock 17 with an RMR, I believe. And I recently just hung out with Dan at RDS Instructor in Tuscaloosa. And because of shooting Dan's 2011 in Homestead, I'm now on the 2011. So
told you that
2011
your bank account.
Yeah,
it's bad for
2011 509T.
It was a bad influence.
For sure.
Bishop, what dot did you have on yours?
So on mine, I had the 509T. Absolutely loved it, especially as the class progresses, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later on.
And then, Dan, what are you carrying these days?
So I'm carrying the Staccato 4.4 P Duo with, right now I have the Acro P1 on it. Started off with the 509 on it. I kind of gone back and forth. Before I went to Staccato, I was carrying a Glock Gen 5 17. And I've carried, the three I've carried on duty have been RMR, and the Acro P1, carried that for a year, and then the 519, carried that for a year. So,
did you guys see any? Sorry, go ahead.
No. Are you gonna ask about dot failures?
Yeah, I was gonna see gear failures in general.
Gear failures in general. So I'm trying to remember from that class. I think we had a Delta Point Pro die on us. One of the older ones though. So it's a battery connectivity issue. Delta or Leopold knows about it. They're under warranty. You're like, hey, my dot's like, it's the battery connection, like the glue that holds it on. Like it'll come off. Send it back to Delta or send it back to Leopold. They'll get it fixed for you. And I think we had condensation on the inside of an emitter window, but I can't remember if it's an RMR or a Holosun like 507. I want to say it was a 507. So those are our two failure rates. So when you get condensation on the inside of the emitter window, it's got to go back to whoever the manufacturer is. I've seen it with both Trijicon and Holosun, and it's got to go back. They've got to dry the insides out at that point. So,
what are some of the common issues that you're seeing across from the different courses you run?
Mounting issues for the dots. So you'll have because it's again geared towards LE. I'll have a majority of cops in my class. So a majority of them are running either Glock, Smith and Wessons, some sort of plate system like the Glock MOS. And if you don't mount that correctly, I taught a class down in contract class for a Florida agency, and they had installed with no thread locker. They just used the thread locker that came on the screws, and that's it. And so we had like plate failures from everybody. Like all the guns failed on that one. And then the other one that you'll see is you'll have the threads start to get loose, and guys are like, I'm gonna just continue shooting anyways. And then like it slowly starts to vibrate, and then it shears those screws off. I've had that happen in one class so far. For most of them will catch it in time, because I'll tell them from the beginning, like I'll tell them that story, and most guys will be checking. And then iron sights, backup iron sights are our second most common failure. Well, backup irons are the most common failure in the class. But those two things, plate systems and the irons. So when it comes to Glocks especially the Gen 5s, if you're running iron sights that don't have set screws on your rear sight, you'll see drift from you can almost guarantee it. Like you'll see the dudes will show up with the Ameriglows and the Trijicons, and they're like, yeah man, there's no way those iron sights are making it through the class. And then had a few front sights fly off, because again they're taller than we're used to. They'll snag on the ALS and the holster. It's just additional pressure, and those will fly off. So yeah, those are our two biggest equipment issues. And then every now and then we'll have holster failures with the positional work section that we do.
Yeah, my plate screws.
I'm sorry, what?
What were you gonna say, Bishop?
I had issues with my plate mounting setup. When I was at the class, had to dive into Blake's treasure trove of tools to retighten, and then I think we ended up swapping slides and everything too, because he brought like 5 of them with him anyway. So yeah, he saved me on that one, man.
Hotel armor.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah.
Nice. It's interesting that you have quite a bit of iron sight failures. I've read that irons don't fail.
Yep.
Get you killed in the streets.
Yeah.
Get you killed in the streets. But, I mean, as anything, right? When you look at irons, plates, I mean, prior to running red dots, I've had irons fail. Like I've had irons fly off on me. And it almost always comes down to install, right? Like you're just trying to tighten it down. You see the increased failure from the Glocks because of the coating that's on the Gen 5s. So the channel's not as thick as it should be. So that's what I love about that's why I recommend guys having running sights that have set screws in them. So,
makes sense.
and then witness marking everything, so you know when it's drifted, so you can catch it early.
What are some common obstacles that you saw in that class from other students, Bishop, and then Blake? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well. Just some common obstacles that other students were facing.
So that class that we attended, and it's a reason I like the Centrifuge classes, is because when you're at your agency, there's usually not a whole lot of guys that are into training and super turned on when it comes to shooting. But that class, man, that we were at, there were some seriously good shooters there. I'd say, though, the biggest issue there was probably some of the precision work, because I want to say we were shooting 2-inch circles pushing back to 10 yards or further. something like that. So, and and going back to the question previous, for me, that was probably the hardest thing for me to do, was to build up that accuracy. But the way that he progressed with it, working single hand, offhand, and then primary hand, and so on and so forth, it makes you realize the dot is not moving as much when you got those two hands. So I would say that was probably the biggest issue, was the precision work, just because the standard was pretty damn high.
Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that's absolutely true. And another thing I've seen kind of consistently is a lot of dudes think that they're actually target focused, and they're still focusing on that dot. So Dan does a good job with running you through some malfunction drills with the dot, and the first being occluding the lens and still running the dot. And I think that instantly shows the dudes that thought they were target focused that they're still dot focused. So and that happens a lot more common than you'd think. Dudes that are good shooters shooting really good with an RDS handgun, and then you throw that tape on the front lens, and it's like, wow. I wasn't actually target focused. So that's probably what my answer would be, most common hurdle there.
That's one of my aha moment drills, was putting the painter's tape over the lens, and holy shit, you can still see the dot on the target. I'm doing it right. You know what I mean? So Dano, every instructor has a drill that they see their students like, oh, okay, you see. Almost all of them see something that they don't normally see. Usually with all your students, one or the other one, if they're good students and they've spent some time in doing research, they're gonna know one or the other one's gonna find a drill that they understand, right? But what's your drill, without giving away too much, that you see students really change the way they shoot with an RDS?
So the first one is just putting tape over the front of the glass as we start into running. It's not a shooting. It's not a high speed drill in any way, shape, or form, but it's shooting one shot from the ready with tape over the front of your glass, and then shooting one shot from the holster with tape over the front of your glass. And by the without fail, at the end of that, you'll have probably 95% of the students being like, "I thought I was target focused, and I wasn't target focused at all." So. That'll definitely have this like aha moment. And then the second one is our distance workup. So we'll do support hand only at 15 yards. Then we'll do a series with strong hand only 20 yards. And the whole point of that is, by the time you put two hands on the gun at 25, it'll feel like the dot's not moving. So that'll have them it helps them embrace that wobble. And you'll have a majority of guys go, by the time I got back to 25, it felt like the dot wasn't moving nearly as much anymore. And so that's generally like the second like big aha moment. And then a bunch of like little ones across the along the way of the class, depending on like where they're from and what they're used to. The malfunction section, that'll be an aha moment as well, because guys are like, oh, my chief's worried about this, or the captain's worried about that, and I realized by the end of it, like I can run the dot through anything. I just need, for some guys, they're like, I just need more work on it. So those are probably the three big like aha moments throughout the class, generally.
Let's talk about some of the misconceptions that students have coming into that class, and I guess some of the misconceptions that departments have around the RDS. I know folks talk about, if you get into an entangled fight or a ground fight, your dot's going to break. I've always been of the opinion, if you're wrestling with somebody on the ground, you probably don't need your dot, let alone your irons at that point. But what are some of the other myths that we're seeing around the dots?
Myths. Well, there's all kinds. The general myth is dots are slower up close. Just in general. I run a couple drills. When we start working rapid fire, when we start working on tracking the dot drills, guys start to recognize that the reason that they are not they think they're slower up close is because they're demanding a higher level of accuracy out of the dot than they ever would out of their irons. So I'll always use the example. I'm like, hey man, 3 yards, 8-inch circle. How much of your front sight are you seeing at that distance? And most guys are like, well, I'm not really. Well, of course not, right? You're seeing back plate, rear, front, and the target all relatively the same level of clarity. or you can do the exact same thing with the red dot. The difference is, like, guys are like, no, this dot tells me exactly where the round goes. So you have dudes that are like blowing out this little tiny circle inside the 8-inch circle. They draw the gun, they see the dot, and it's landing in the top part of that circle. And they're like, well, my group's in the center though. So then they'll take the time to drag the dot over the top of over that little group that they've been shooting, and then continue to press on. And you're like, hey man, that's like, you would never do that with irons. You would have seen good enough with irons, and you would start to break the shot. That same attitude though, as soon as you go outside of 10 yards, like that's why guys do shoot better. One of the reasons people shoot better, like outside of 10 yards, or shoot the dot more accurately outside of 10 yards. So because you're still threat focused, the dot tells you where the round goes. That is like, I don't have to see my rear sight. I don't have to see my front sight super clearly, and I don't like need a blurry target in any way, shape, or form. I can just stare at the target, and the dot tells me where the round goes. And the more I stare at the target, the clearer the dot will be, and the less it moves. So that's one of the general hurdles. And then as anything, when you start to bring that in front of your chief, admin, whatever, if you can get them past the cost section of it, which is a whole nother hurdle, it'll be like, well, what happens if you are standing out in a rainstorm? What happens if you fall into a mud puddle? What happens for those up here in the north? Or like, what happens if you fall on a snowbank? Like, how are you going to be able to fight through that? And so portions of the class are geared towards answering those questions. They're like, hey, this may come up. This may be an issue. So you can acknowledge the chief, and then you just tell them, like, it may be an issue, but this is how we're going to train around it. So, but those are, like, having it work through adverse conditions is usually the first hurdle that folks have to get through.
Blake, talk to us a little bit about that, the malfunction drills that you guys worked in class, and without giving too much of the secret sauce away, of course. But
man, it's all out there, man. You can talk about it all you want.
Yeah, it's all over the gram already. My bad.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing to kind of point out is that we get hung up with the dot versus irons argument, and with the dot we at least have the irons as a secondary sighting system. So I think that's kind of the first thing to point out is now we've got multiple sighting systems. But when we're talking about running the malfunction drills, you kind of see people start having a light bulb moment of kind of thinking outside the box, of utilizing other portions of the dot or the gun itself as a sighting system. So he works some occluded glass, some completely occluded rear, using the guillotine method, top of the optic, or even like more of a vent rib using the side of the slide as an aiming method, and just kind of working through. Like I said, maybe some options that you wouldn't normally think of as a way to sight the handgun, and I think dudes really like that portion. I know I did.
We're from New Mexico, so the way I learned how to shoot my first handgun was using the vents on the side of the Glock. You just turn it sideways.
Yeah.
That came easy to me.
Yeah.
But
I've seen that in a lot of videos. I've seen dudes turning the gun in a lot of videos. I didn't realize it was on purpose.
Yeah, it's a training.
Those dudes were just highly trained, man.
Exactly.
They're trained
Bishop,
in the
I got
streets.
2 questions for you. So on the Hollow Sun, you have a Hollow Sun too, right? You said.
Yeah, 519T.
Okay, so Hollow Sun, right? You can use a dot or a circle. One thing I found myself for is using the circle, because your eye naturally goes to the center of the circle. And we talk about those accuracy things as far as somebody that's like trying to find that exact spot for the dot. Do you use a circle or a dot?
I use the dot still, and I hate to say it, but it's probably, I haven't really touched the circle a whole lot, and it's probably goes back to this is the way we've always done it kind of thing. I've just always had a dot on my rifle and on when I started with the red dots on handguns, so I stuck with the dot. Haven't really played with the circle a whole lot yet, so can't
Just
speak on that.
Continuum of training, because you have a dot on the rifle, so a dot on the handgun makes sense.
Yeah, it's just been the natural thing I'm used to.
Dano, what do you think about that?
So the 2 things that'll come up with that, right, is you'll have some guys that prefer the circle, especially those that like with that continuum training, like you're talking about, going from EOTechs to this one. It looks the same. The drawback to some of it, the drawback that most folks will come up with is it's too distracting. It'll draw too much attention of their eye to the circle plus the dot. And guys end up like staring at that reticle versus actually at the target. Conversely though, putting that big circle on when you're first learning, that really helps folks start to pick it up. They'll make those fine-tuned corrections when they start to see the top portion of that reticle. They know, hell, I'm a little high, now I just need to bring it down a little bit. The other thing with that one is, especially inside of 10 yards, you just need to see red over your target and you can start running it. So like I have noticed guys, especially when it comes to speed with something from like A zones, 8, 6-inch circles, when you're running like the VTAC drills, whatever that like whatever drill you may be running, but the 6x6 box, like dudes will like be able to blaze with it because they're just, hey man, I just need to see part of that reticle cross through it, and I'm solid, good to go. But again, the other guys will be like, bro, this is just too busy. It's like too much. I just want a dot. That's all I want. So
yeah,
I
like just the circle solely. Oops, sorry about that. Yeah, interrupted you.
No, I'll tell guys, like I'll tell guys, hey man, definitely try them both. But if you find yourself like staring at that circle, man, go to the dot.
Yeah, Blake, what about you?
I found that for me, I have tried the circle, I've tried the dot, and then also a different variety of size of dots. And for me, I found that less is more. So like I really like the 1 MOA on the SRO. It's not my preferred duty optic, but just as far as shootability, man, I think for me, less is more. Like Dan said, I find myself getting less distracted by the dot and able to maintain more target focus.
Nice. I got one more question. I'll kick it back over to Jeremy. So as far as law enforcement, Dano, do you think in the future when we can get more dots on guns, do you think there should be a restriction on the brands or the types? Because I mean, out there now we got Swamp Fox, Holosun, RMRs.
Yeah.
There's so many out there. I had a Vortex Viper, and I like the Viper itself. I hate that it turns off every 12 hours. So every time I pick up the gun, I'm having to hit the button to make sure it's going to stay on. So what do you think if there would be restrictions? Would you put restrictions on them?
Yes, so I put restrictions on the policies in my department. We have a set number of things that we're looking for performance-wise out of optics. So like first thing, like it has to be manually adjustable. Auto adjust and auto adjust only is a no-go. For law enforcement, because the auto adjust will not keep up with the lighting conditions that you're in. And like I know there are dudes who run auto adjust on duty, and this isn't a knock on you on y'all, man. So like don't send me hate mail on it, right? Just understand that like through the experience that we've had, especially if you take like just Centrifuge alone, like those dots will not keep up. The most common one that you'll see is through headlights. So you're trying to shoot past headlights, and that light will fill the optic window, but will not get to the emitter. So the emitter thinks you're in low light, so it runs at super dim, and you were fighting in full light, and so you need that dot to be super bright, and eventually it will catch up, but it's not. It won't catch up fast enough for what you're trying to win your gunfight at. So auto adjust again is a no-go. We talk about durability. It does have to have some measure of durability. But when I say durability, it has to be like on par with Delta Point Pro SRO, right? If it's not an RMR, you're trading. You're going to trade something, right? Like these two guys can attest. I tell guys in the equipment section of the class, I'm like, hey, there's pros and cons to everything. Like the industry hasn't produced the optic that we're looking for. I'm a huge proponent of closed emitter systems, especially up here in the Northwest, because it rains. Like it's just now it's just now beginning our rainy season, and it's going to rain for 9 months straight. Whereas, like, how often does it rain in New Mexico?
What's raining?
Yeah,
I've heard of it.
Exactly. Yeah, right. So again, it depends on your environment, your environment that you're going to be working in. And everything's a trade-off, right? So for open emitter systems, they work really well with, you're able to work through fogging. So the cats that are down in like Alabama, Florida, Georgia, where it's going to be, 1,000% humidity and 95 degrees out. And so they're going to be sitting in their air-conditioned cruiser, and then they're going to hop out into that weather, and then they're going to hop back in. Like that glass has the chance to fog. if you're running an open emitter system, if it fogs, you can't see through it. Now you're shooting with an obstructed shooting method. Whereas open emitter, you will see a dot projected on the glass. It'll be fuzzy, but you'll be able to see the dot. But again, when they're fighting through like fucking hurricane, whatever, but they may want to close the system. So again, it's like pros and cons to everything. If it's not an RMR, it's not going to be as durable, right? Like it was designed to absorb a drop on top of an ACOG sitting on top of an M16. Like it was designed to absorb that impact. So as soon as it's not that like concave shape, it's just not going to be as durable. So you're going to end up trading stuff. But you'll see dudes when they run like Delta Point Pro, they run an SRO, 509 acros. It has a little bit more of a window. Well, that's easier to find the dot. There's less room to get lost. You have less obstruction from irons, like more glass. It's more forgiving as you're starting to present out the target. So you're able to find the dot faster, but the trade-off is like you can like slip, trip, fall, impact your holster into the asphalt and break your dot kind of thing. So like I said, everything's a trade-off when it comes to equipment. When it comes to like what it's going to look like in law enforcement, if it's not Aimpoint, Holosun, Trigicon, Leopold, man, it probably doesn't belong on a duty gun. So that's my opinion though. You look at like Las Vegas Metro's policy. I mean, they approve everything under the sun. So, but the other thing is, and I'll say this, like I'll talk about this in the policy section. You have to have training mandated in the policy, which they do. And bro, you show up to one of their classes with a J point, it's not making it out of class, right? So again, everything's a trade-off, man. Pros and cons to everything. My biggest thing is like it has to have some measure of durability, and it has to be manually adjustable. After that, like it's really put it through its paces. The third one is it's from a department standpoint. So this may not be a big deal for like CCW folks, but if you're running a red dot program for your agency, you have to have a top-loading battery. Like the durability of the RMR and the trade-off and what it takes to like maintenance that on a department level scale is rough. So especially with the advent and the tech that they have now, to me, it's got to be a top-loading battery, because now you're talking about like if you run an agency of 100 officers and they all elect to carry dots, that's 100 guns. You got to peel the dot off, replace the battery, put it back on, and let it like sit for 24 hours before you even confirm zero with it. And if you don't do that, then you're talking about like sidetracking through some of the rules, and it's only a matter of time before someone gets fucked from it, you know. So, but those are the big things that I look for out of equipment restrictions when it comes to law enforcement.
Bishop and Blake, talk to us a little bit about how you handle the brightness settings and what that looks like from a duty perspective, and how you're training fellow officers on how to address that.
So for me on my end, I pretty much run the dot day bright across the board. My reasoning for that is, I mean, when I activate that weapon light, it's basically daytime, especially with the light I'm running right now. So if I run it too dim, it's going to wash out. And Dan's laughing. Yeah. And if I find myself in a setting where it's semi-low light and I'm not activating the weapon light, even if I'm getting a little bit of starbursting, you put that dot or that red dot on the target, and it's the same thing. I haven't really found any lighting situation on the range, whether it's outdoor or indoor, that it's been an issue running it at the at day bright levels.
What about you, Blake?
Yeah, pretty much same exact thing. And now, you know, running like the weapon light, the PL 350 that Mod Light just came out with, the intensity and the focus of the throw of that weapon light, same deal. You know, bumping that light almost all the way up, if not all the way up on daylight, and as well as low light with the weapon light.
Dan, how much of a concern is lighting when it comes to dots. Is that something that gets blown out of proportion a little bit, or is that something that folks should be concerned about, both on the LE and civilian side of things?
Well, I think it's something you have to be aware of, that your dot can get washed out if you're not running it with at the right brightness setting. From an LE perspective, as I'll tell folks, when you talk about transitioning your officers over, it's a change in their start of day habits. So especially like we started off issuing folks Trijicon RMR Type 2s, the RMR 06. After 16 and a half hours, that thing drops into auto adjust. So at the start of every day, you have to make an adjustment to your dot brightness so it stays on manual and it stays on the brightness setting that you want it. Otherwise, it'll drop into auto adjust, and it'll be fine for like it'll probably be fine, but you're setting yourself up for fighting in these transient lighting conditions. When you look at the data, 68% of law enforcement shootings occur in low light settings. So that's what we're prepping for. That's what our start of the day preps for. That's what you need to be able to run your dot for. When it comes to like those awkward sun angles that kind of like fill the glass up, for me, it's not so much a concern. It's just on a day-to-day basis, it's a concern from an exposure standpoint. If your shooters have never seen it before, it'll cause novelty and it'll cause them to stop shooting, or it'll cause them to like think something's the dot and it's not actually the dot. So it's just an exposure issue. If you can get your shooters to work through it and have them see it, then they're familiar with it and they're able to fight through it, and it's not a big deal. Which is why, like, I'll tell most folks, like, hey man, if you're dry firing in your basement and that's all you're doing, like that, and maybe take the gun out and shoot it like once a month, you're not going to get the same level of like failure rates. You're not going to have the same issues that crop up as those that are like out on the range every single day, various hours. You know what I mean? So if that's your, like, that's the only time you can train, right? I've got to dry fire. It's got to be in the basement. I would set up like various lighting conditions, right? So have lights low that are kind of dim and forcing you to go handheld against the wall. Have it splash with either umbrella lighting or baseboard lighting, so you get those like weird lighting conditions even just indoors, so you can kind of get used to it. And that's where you will get, every now and then you get some like weird reflection. They're like, oh man, I think that's the dot. Nope, just kidding, that's not the dot. Like it just builds that experience and that comfort level in those weird lighting conditions that we'll see.
Yeah, that's I was taking a class last year, taking a range master course with Tom Gibbons. Had the sun setting behind me, completely oblivious, didn't even think about it. Get the gun out, and we're running his casino drill. You know, that's the one where you're kind of competing with everybody else. Yep. And I stopped. My buddy Tim Herron was taking the class with me, and afterward he's talking about it. He's like, man, he's like, what's going on? What's going on? And I completely froze. I was like, what in the hell? I was a little bit pissed because I just switched over, and I'm like, oh, dots, because that's Tom's thing, right? Like one of the old guard is like, oh, dots fail in every class, and I was like, son of a bitch, he was right. And then I was like, oh no, it's my fault. I didn't fucking adjust the brightness setting. Dot didn't fail. It was user error. Yeah.
But that's the thing. Like when you look at training, like why do you take training in the first place, and what we're looking for, just how I end up building out classes is the whole point for these is like you cannot just throw a dot on a gun and expect to be good. The dot will present malfunctions and issues that you don't have any experience with. So you have to train around those. Like you have to give your brain some sort of experience. If you've never seen it before, then that's novelty, and that will cause you to stop processing. Like it'll cause you to stop whatever you're doing because you have not seen it before. So to me, it's very rarely the equipment issue. It is a new experience for the shooter. And for me, hey, let's note that. Let's talk about it. That's a new experience for you, and I doubt you'll ever do that again. Right? From an instructor side of it, like especially in the instructor class, was like, hey, so that experience that you had, everybody you put through class probably needs that same experience. Wouldn't you agree? And they're like, yeah, it's true. Like, so we're not just going to stand here flat-footed at the 7. As I tell guys, like the class focuses on three things: finding the dot, tracking the dot, red dot specific malfunctions. After that, you're just changing context, positional work, low light. Like those are contexts that you have to fight in and around, and that's where you have to give your shooters a different context to build that experience level out.
Are you seeing folks? Because there's conversations that are going on with around RDS specific courses, and should the industry be focusing on and offering RDS specific courses, or is it more of instructor candidates coming here because more and more of their students are showing up with RDS equipped handguns, and they're wanting to be able to address those students in their normal courses?
It's both. So you'll have more folks showing up with RDS. Like we're at that tipping point. So you have more folks. I've had a bunch of academy instructors come through because they're seeing more and more recruits come through with RDS guns. So they're like, they shoot their irons fantastic. They're like, but I want to go to a red dot class so I can figure out what's going on with this, which kind of ties into the first part, right? I know there are a few dudes out in the industry, and I love them to death. And they're like, hey man, like you don't see red dot on shotgun classes. You don't see red dot on rifle classes going around. Like, why are we doing red dot on handgun classes? And I completely get what they're saying, right? But when it comes to like red dots on rifles, right? Because the most common thing that comes up is like, hey, we all run patrol rifles with red dots. Like, so it obviously just translates into handguns. And I'm like, okay, if it translates, then why can't we just throw red dots on handguns and call it good? Right? You have to rewire sight alignment, sight picture, those two fundamentals, because you're going from, for some dudes, thousands of repetitions of front sight focus to now going back to what your brain does naturally under stress, and that's target focus. So in addition to, there are specific malfunctions, issues that crop up with red dots that have to be trained because you've never experienced them with irons. The most common one is like when I tape, so occluded shooting. Well, that's something that occurs. You can have that occur with irons. Like you can fall into a mud bank, come out, and like your irons are completely covered, and you're not gonna be able to use them. But how often are we standing on the range taping irons to shoot with it? We tape them to train grip mechanics and presentation to target, and guys will use it there. But at the same time, like that's like few and far between the instructors that will do that. So when it comes to like red dot specific classes, like my whole goal is to teach myself out of a job, because at some point it will be so prevalent that we will be at the level, the knowledge base that we now have with red dots on rifles. But it took us a while to get there, because this is the other thing I'll tell guys. I'm like, okay, because I remember back in 2005, we were throwing ACOGs on M16s, and guys are like, I'm never going to trust my life to glass. Like, iron sights have never failed me. What happened? You know, dudes will tell you horror stories of like they were one of the first to show up at some carbine class with a red dot on their carbine, and the instructor would like throw it in the dirt. They'd turn it off. Like, how are you going to fight through this? And dudes are trying to figure it out. And so I was telling them, like, hey man, if there were like 6, 12, 20 cats traveling the country teaching red dot on carbine, do you think we would have like in 2000, like, because there are agencies in 2019 that are just now throwing red dots on rifles, like at the tail end of an acceptance. It's rare to have red dot, like dudes show up in carbine classes running only irons. You know what I mean? And I'm like, but it took us a long time to get there. And I'm like, do you think that would have like shortcutted, like shortened the learning curve, built up the acceptance? Like, hey, these are the issues that come up with this tech. This is how you fight around it. This is how we would have avoided some of the stuff like I've had in red dot classes. They're like, dude sitting there like we're going around, we're debriefing at the end of the day, and you can tell like he's thinking really hard, and he's like, so does everything you said with a red dot on a pistol apply to a red dot on a rifle? I'm like, yeah, dude, it's target focus, right? It's like, oh man, like that is brand new information for some, right? You know what I mean? So I'm like, hey, what if we had cats doing this, like traveling the country, teaching red dot on carbines? Now, those classes would be non-existent now. And we're probably about to start up the next thing is like having dudes travel the country teaching iron sights on rifle classes. Because you know what I mean? Because you guys are like, hey man, what happens if red dot fails? Dudes would be like, I don't really shoot irons a whole lot. I'm like, all right. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things like I think the advantage of the red dot class, especially when it comes to LE, is in addition to the equipment side of it, you're rewiring sight alignment, sight picture. And there are tips, tricks, stuff that from an instructor standpoint you can do to shortcut that learning curve for the dudes that you're teaching. And that's the whole point of the class is it's not to just make you a better shooter, it's to make you a better instructor. So when it comes to that's the thing with when we talk about red dots and like red dots on shotgun classes, whatever that may be, right? There are some nuances to it that can be very specific. That, hey man, if I can go to this class, get this information, I can get to the actual like learning the struggles of the shooter, not learning the struggles of like program management kind of thing, right? So that's my 2 cents on it.
I found there aren't very many instructors teaching people how to use their irons. They're not even teaching people how to use their damn sights. They're just here's a man, your minute of man at 7 yards. You hit them, you're good enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's a whole other thing, right? Guys are like, hey, why aren't we having iron sight classes show up? I'm like, well, yes, there's nobody traveling teaching iron sight only classes. You're expected as an instructor, especially if you're not teaching like a red dot specific class, to teach both of those, be able to go back and forth between both concepts. But therein lies the rub. You have to go back and forth between both concepts. So we're all in agreement. There are concepts that don't translate. Hence the red dot classes in the first place.
I would just like to see more classes with actual accuracy standards. But if an instructor has accuracy standards, it makes it painfully obvious at the end of the class that the instructor didn't know how to teach you what they wanted to teach you.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
So nobody has accuracy standards, and then at the end of the class, everybody feels good about the shotgun pattern they have on their damn target, and then that little fancy certificate that they spent more time making than they did developing their damn curriculum, and charging folks money.
I'll be honest, man. That is one thing I don't spend time doing is making certificates. You maybe get it like a month later. I'm not gonna lie. That's our bad. So
yeah, I was on the line, and I was on the line a couple of year before last, and I heard an instructor tell a female student, "That's good enough. You still hurt them." And I said, "What in the fuck did you just tell this? You're good enough. You still hurt him.
Still hurt him."
Yep.
I think she felt real good about herself.
Shit.
Yeah. So that's a good segue over to back to the course. Is what are your standards for your instructors to pass your course? Does it guarantee I give you money and I pass this course, or are there actually standards that I have to actually meet in order to get a certificate in a couple months?
Yeah, so in a couple months. No, so we do have standards, right? So there's obviously you can't have any safety violations whatsoever. If I have to bounce out the class, you're not getting a certificate. There's a written test you have to pass. It's 10 questions, fill in the blank, true, false. Fill in the blank, true, false, and open it, and not essay questions, but like you have to be able to write down the concepts. Then you have to do there's a shooting qual at the end. So it's an 8-inch, it looks like a fast roll target. So it's an 8-inch circle and then it's a 3x5 card. So you'll go 25 yards, 2 standing, 3 kneeling in 15 seconds. Then we go up to the 10-yard line. We go 10 rounds, 10 seconds from the holster. Then we'll go 5 rounds, 7 seconds, support hand only. Then we'll do 5 rounds, 7 seconds, strong hand only from the holster. Then you'll turn it off and you'll go 3 rounds to the circle, 2 rounds to the rectangle, iron sights only in 7 seconds. Everything is shot one at a time to hold everybody accountable to one, the time standard in and of itself, and then the second one is to put a little bit of class pressure on you, right? So it's already a qualification. You have everybody staring at you, going down the line one at a time. And like some of the stress can get to folks. So every round is worth, it's a 30 round qual. Every round is worth 1 point, 24 points to pass. So achievable standards. So
you get any folks running it with their subcompact or carry gun?
I've had one person in class run with a 43X. Everything else has been duty guns. Glock 19, Glock 17, those are our two most common guns. Staccatos are starting to make their way into the classes more and more with their plate system. Smith & Wessons will be in there. I've had a couple H&Ks milled that have come through. But yeah, Glock MOS is probably the most frequent gun I see.
Blake, let's get your advice that you have for potential students.
Prepare to be humbled, really, on your own ability. Again, there's a lot of misconception in running the RDS on the handgun, and one example given was the threat focus. So, this class is an instructor level course, and there's a lot of things in there that kind of makes it unique as an instructor course. But I think even the good shooters get something out of it on the performance end of it. So. Nothing too crazy, nothing like to worry too much about going into the thing, but you do have to have a good understanding of fundamentals, and I guess that's about it.
What about you, Bishop? What advice do you have?
I'd say the same. Even the qual for the course, you don't have to be a competition shooter. If you apply the fundamentals correctly and what he's taught in the course, especially if you have prior experience on the RDS, I don't think it'd be an issue unless you let your nerves get to you. Everybody watching, that never helps. But besides that, I mean, just get to the course, sign up. It's better to take the years of experience these guys have had running the RDS, especially if you're new, to kind of fast track what you're doing with the RDS, because you don't have to go and learn on your own. You can learn from their experiences. And like for me, I was pretty new to the RDS when I went to the class. I'd only been running it for 4 or 5 months. And man, when I walked away from the class, like I said before, I want to go again because there was so much small information spread out throughout the class that by the end of it, it changed how I was shooting drastically, both on the performance side and also on the instructing side, because you're able to diagnose what people are doing wrong, what the common issues are. So, I mean, if you run an RDS for work or even as just a citizen and you haven't taken this class, I mean, I don't know. You got to sign up, man. It's just sign up and go learn. There's a ton of information.
Now, you guys mentioned force on force. Is that a component of this course?
Yeah, so that's been the new addition to 2021. So my whole goal has been to, when I first started out, it's a lot of information in 2 days. So the goal was to get it to 3 days, which I was able to pull off. So we were able to add low light on the second day, and then force on force. So I have 3 UTM slides. We're very fortunate to have the Centrifuge is very fortunate to have a good relationship with UTM. And so, like I said, I have 3 UTM slides cut for red dots, and that's been the big thing. Like, we'll spend 2.5 days grinding live fire. Guys will be starting to figure it out. But if you don't incorporate that force on force aspect of it, fighting another human being, you'll find dudes will go back to the way that they've always done it. They will look over the top of their sights. They will start to just throw rounds down range. They're like, no, I'm totally, like, if this is where your gun's supposed to be, it's like, no, I'm good, and just throwing rounds, hoping for hits. And as Will likes to say, like, we're not in the business of the Helen Keller school of gunfighting. If there's lead in the air, there's hope in the heart, right? It's just like that's not what we're in the business of making, right? Like that's not us. So again, holding guys accountable to those accuracy standards, being able to work at the speed of control physically as well as emotionally, and being able to get their hits, and then give them that exposure of like, hey man, this is what you're used to with irons. Now let's throw a red dot on the gun, and then give them a few reps through of fighting another person, and then debriefing them afterwards. Like, hey man, do you remember seeing your dot? And the first go around, guys are like, nope, not really sure. I don't, maybe. And then the second and third round, where the stress is they're starting to mitigate that stress a little bit better. Dudes will remember. They're like, oh yeah, I saw that every press. I'm like, I saw his shin, and I'm like, gotcha, kind of thing, right? Like, dudes will start to pick that up. And to me, that is something that has been good to incorporate. Being able to have folks fight another human being and implement the stuff that we've been talking about over the last 2.5 days. Because that's the thing, man. It's not. I've shot competition. I'm not a real good competition shooter. Like I just don't have time to go do it. For me, it is about making accurate gunfighters. And if we're not gunfighting, even if it's like, and UTM is the closest we can get to gunfighting another human being. Like it's not a perfect replication. There's like, it's not a perfect replication, but it is better than nothing. And it's certainly better than just running around with blue guns or laser guns or whatever it might be. Being able to work through malfunctions, see your accuracy standard on another person, and problem solving against another person in real time. So which is why the fight for why the addition of force on force for the last half of the third day.
Nice, I like it. One of the things that I've consistently seen with the Centrifuge training is that the training is data driven, and I feel like you guys have become one of the leading law enforcement training companies in the country, and now Canada as well. So talk to us a little bit about the motivation for that, and how much time on the back end goes into developing and refining these courses.
A lot goes into the back end. No, we're not. Oh man, Blake, I can't believe you took that with a straight face, man. A lot goes into the development of the class. Because at the end of the day, like, you need experience, right? Dudes have to have experience, but you cannot build a class on experience alone. You have to have the data to support it. Because what you can find out with a lot of guys is, or a lot of things is, there's experience, and it's an experience level 1. Like I had one thing, and it went this one way, and they'll apply that to across the board. But when you start looking at the data, you will identify trends and then you can build drills to address those trends as you start to work through it. The other thing is, especially when it comes to red dots on guns, right? That comes down to being able, like, how you sell the class. Because I can stand up there and tell the chief, like, hey, I was able to do X, Y, and Z with the red dot. So, but that's just me, right? That's me, my ability as a shooter, and the chief can kind of write that off. They're like, oh, it's just Dan. Versus if I can show them data, like, hey, they did, like, Houston PD has been running red dots on their all of their recruits guns since 2018, and this is the success they've had with that, and this is what they've learned from that. You can sit there and say, like, hey, this is the Norwich University study, right? Which is, I mean, yes, you can have that. That's a good place to start with data, but that's not like, do not base your program off of that study and that study alone. So, but it does come up. Like, guys will bring that up. When it comes to analyzing data, it's not just like official studies, but then you're analyzing video, pulling trends off, you're watching human behavior under stress, and then you start to identify trends from there as well. So like one, some of the things that'll come up that we can identify from accuracy standards is we're watching these officer involved shootings, and you're looking at like how much movement guys are getting out of the gun. So that's a trend, right? Like that's showing that whatever we're teaching for grip isn't translating when it's force on force, right? Whether it be with fake bullets or real bullets, kind of thing, right? But that's the thing, is like, yes, you can have a lot of experience, and I have I tell a lot of stories in class when it comes to like, hey, just like learn from my mistake. Here's another story about my mistake. Here's another story about my mistakes, right? To have that experience, that is a good place to start. But understand, like, if you cannot throw like actual data at it, at the end of the day, like Blake can't go back to his chief or his sheriff in North Carolina and be like, hey, sheriff, this dude Dan Smith from Washington State, like he's run a red dot program for 4 years, and this is what he's learned from it. And the chief's going to be like, well, first of all, that's Washington State, so that's not even this country. And then second of all, like, who's this guy? And that doesn't apply here. Whereas like he can go, if he can take data back, he can be like, hey, chief, this is how this is going to apply to our officers. And as with anything, like, data doesn't give a fuck what your opinion is. It just is.
Blake and Bishop, where are you guys at with? So you guys, are you running the RDS training programs in your departments? Is that something that you're still looking to get off the ground? What's that?
Yeah, so we don't have any AACs in Western North Carolina that's running it as a program yet. There's a couple that is starting to allow officers, if they've got the means to put a dot on their gun, they can do it. But again, like I mentioned earlier, I run in-service training for the community college system. And in North Carolina, we run in-service kind of in regions and by community colleges. And with that being said, I have had a few agencies come to me that's kind of started the questions of, what does policy look like around the red dot site, care, maintenance, things like that. So the questions are being asked. And a lot of the instructors are starting to, obviously, if you keep up with the times, why fight on hard mode, right? And a lot of the instructors are making the changes on their personal guns or their range guns. So I think there's some influence coming pretty quickly that's going to lead into some agencies putting guns in officers' hands. I know we've got a SWAT team that's in the process now of getting some slides milled, and then we've got a campus police that just purchased like a couple dozen MOS guns, so it's coming.
How much of the, how much of the curriculum covers that, the department-specific policy issues that typically arise when an agency is looking to allow or adopt red dots for their officers' duty weapons?
So the policy itself is maybe a 10-minute discussion, because I'll tell guys like, so if you pass the class, right, no safety violations, written test, and qual, I send dudes a Dropbox link with all of the data for the class. So the studies that I've read, that I've based the curriculum off of, videos that I use, the lesson plans that I've written, the drills that we've done, the targets that we print out for the class. That is all in that Dropbox link. So it allows dudes to go back and policies. And so it allows dudes to go back and cut and paste and copy and pull out whatever they may need to get their program up and running. And then as with anything, man, you come to the class, I give the dudes my phone number. I call, text whenever. I will get back to you and help you out with this journey here. When it comes to policy, I'll tell guys there's 3 things that policy has to address, and I will give them examples, because at the end of the day, like, whatever your policy may be as an administrator, most of them are not looking for a lecture from a line level guy on what policy is going to read. They're going to be like, hand me the policy from whatever, Las Vegas Metro. And they're going to delete Las Vegas Metro, and they're going to type in Cherokee County Sheriff's Office. You know what I mean? Like, it like that is how policy works within the administrators. For us, we're a Lexipol agency, which is like a third party that you pay money to that produces the policies. So they have to be able to send like, hey, here's what we need, and they have to, like, that officer then has to send it off to Lexipol. Lexipol will create the policy and then send it back to the agency. You know what I mean? So spending like hours pulling up policies and writing through it, like, to me, I found is just not a good use of class time. I'll tell you the three things that it has to hit, right? You have to talk about equipment, you have to address training, and you have to address maintenance for both the gun as well as the policy itself. Outside of that, here's some examples that address those three things. But like pulling up 4 or 5 policies and showing you how good or how bad it is, it's not, to me, it's not a good use of our time. That starts the equipment discussion for training day 2, right? So because that's the thing, is like, that's what your policy is going to address. Are you a can have versus shall issue agency kind of thing? And there are different things to consider with that. But then dive into equipment considerations, auto adjust versus manual adjust, durability, manufacturers. The discussion used to be super simple a couple of years ago, because there were only a couple dots that you could really put on guns. Places that, like, it was a Glock MOS and that's it, or you got it milled. Like, those are really our only options. The holster was just the Safari Land, and there's your technology discussion right there. But now we have closed emitter, open emitter, Blackhawk, Safari Land, Alien Gear, Glock MOS, FN 509s, CZ P10s, Smith & Wesson cores, staccatos, right? Like, there's like guns, plates, milling, optics. Like, it's a pretty, like, it's starting to be a more robust discussion for the class than it used to be.
Nice. Bishop, I wanted to get your thoughts on where you're at with your department as far as the RDS discussion goes on that side of things.
Yeah. So where we're at right now is they're allowing people to show up and run an RDS, but we don't have a policy implemented yet. In my opinion, it's kind of doing it a disservice, because I feel like at some point someone higher up is going to want to nix allowing the RDSs at all, because someone's going to show up with some rinky-dink RDS, something's going to happen, it's going to go down, or guys on the range notice it, and then the whole program gets thrown out. So we're trying right now to have our SRT implement them so they can build the program, which, I mean, we already have the information. I have it. So if that happens, I think from there, agency-wide will be good. But our pushback that we keep running into is budget. So at first it was, okay, maybe we could do the budget. And then they started to ask all these other questions, which after going to the Centrifuge class, I kind of had, we had an answer for every but Dan or but Will. You know, they came up with all kinds of different things. And then once they realized that was all shut down, it kind of goes back to, oh, well, the budget. So what we're trying to do is, I would like to have a policy implemented so that guys can still go out and buy stuff, but they have to stick within certain parameters so they don't ruin it for everybody else. Because it's just easier for admin to kill something than it is to actually look into it. So, but yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, when that first dude gets in a shooting with an RDS, it's going to go one of 2 ways for you guys. Everybody's getting them, or nobody's ever going to have one.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. 2 steps forward, 5 steps back.
Yeah.
Hey, Dano, do you provide like frequently asked questions or some kind of form like that your law enforcement students can take back for their higher up
naysayer in the admin department?
Yeah, is there, kind of like a frequently dispelled things that you can help these guys with, that they, maybe there's a question that's going to come up from somebody, and these students may, I can't remember what he said about that. So something.
So it's not a specific like facts page, but they do have the lesson plan for the instructor class. They have the lesson plan for the 10-hour transition class. They have a sheet in there that talks about specific steps when mounting, like how to mount the slide, or the optic to the plate to the slide, right? right? They have to have all of the like studies that have been used in the class. So if it can't be found between those references, then they have my phone number, right? And they can give me a call. Very like it's been pretty rare to have dudes text me with a question that has been covered in class. It's always like that random like, hey man, I've got a dude who's like he's cross-eyed dominant with a lazy eye, and he looked into a telescope when he was 8 at the sun. So there's a blind spot in the center of that off eye. So like, how do we get him to target focus? I'm like, yeah, man, let's work on that. So, some of those descriptions, I'm like, yep, fuck it, send me a picture. Like, like you're gonna have to send me a picture because if I'm picturing one thing, and it could be something different. But those are the tough ones because I tell some guys like, or I will tell everybody in class like, it's not for everybody, right? As with anything, because there are trade-offs that. There are pros and cons to everything. There are trade-offs with the RDS programs. You are talking about increased maintenance on the gun. So if you have officers that qual once a year, and when they qual, they break like it comes out of the holster that has been discontinued by Safariland 20 years ago, but that's their holster, and they don't want to learn another way. And when they break all 3 buttons and that comes out and you see the dust bunny fly off across the range, it looks like a goddamn tumbleweed. Like that's not your dude. Like you're not gonna put an RMR in that dude's hand. You're just not. Because at that point it's more of a liability than it is a help. They will shoot better with it for sure. But when it comes to like having their life depend on it, it's not, the juice is not worth the squeeze at that point. And that's what I'll tell guys, like it has to be like it has to be a can have, not a shall issue agency. You have to have the way of folks that just are not going to maintain it, not carry it. Let them have irons, right? We'll find other ways.
Are there any other, like, I know it's folks with astigmatisms, they might have issues with the dot. What about folks that are colorblind? Are there any other just physical impairments that will prevent the efficient use of a dot?
Astigmatism, or just eye issues in general, like how they see things, because that is it is such a broad range. That's why I always prefer like, hey man, having guns on the range so guys can look through it and see like, and have them tell you what are they seeing. For stigmatisms, that's where like that's the nice part about the Holosun is you can go from a big dot. But if you have a weird, like a certain type of stigmatism, it looks like this like big streak. Well, then going to that very small dot, it now actually looks like a dot and doesn't streak as much, and it's easier to use. So having that adjustable. You'll have guys that are like, man, I want the biggest dot possible, but if they're running a 6.5 MOA RMR and they're having astigmatism, man, I guarantee you those guys aren't seeing dots. They're made like streaks, stars, semicolons. Like I've had it described a bunch of different ways. Whereas you can hand them 3.25 to 1 MOA dots, size dots, it'll be a little bit easier. But again, that's in that lesson plan that guys can reference back to of like, hey man, what is this going to look like? They're like, oh shit, I forgot, and they're able to like scroll through and find it.
So we had a listener comment. This is from Scott, one of our instructors. Any comments or concerns on life expectancy of an RDS in field use? Are these guys burning through them more often than the Safe Queens, obviously, but at what point, I guess, would you look at replacing the dot altogether?
I would say just by like, you have to judge it based on wear and tear. It's more of a round count than it is like a year kind of thing. That's one of the nice things about having plate systems is it allows your agency to keep up with tech advances. So when RMR or when Trijicon finally releases a version of the RMR that has a top loading battery, which is like, it's got to be a matter of time at this point, then you're able to like swap plates and update the technology and keep up with it. General life expectancy goes where it's like generally 15,000 rounds, but like that's super general, and I wouldn't put don't put money on that number kind of thing, right? When it comes to just everyday use, I mean, you can beat the shit out of them, and those things will keep ticking, and then you'll have some that come out of the box and don't work. So it's really, it's truly, they can last the life of the gun. But even when you talk to law enforcement guys, that's on a time frame. Like, they'll replace guns at 10 years, but that gun's nowhere near its actual like life expectancy. You can keep shooting that gun past 10 years because officers aren't going to shoot 15,000 rounds a year every year for 10 years. It's like, this is just not going to happen. Blake will, right? I might, but again, like that's because we're on the range all the time. Your average patrol officer, that's not the case. So again, you will have tech advance. You will have the technology advance before you reach the life expectancy of that tech, right? So what's on the guns right now is not going to be relevant 3 years from now.
Makes sense. So. Nice. I think we've covered just about, I don't know, a small percentage of stuff that we could probably cover when it comes to RDS, on the handgun and all that good stuff. But before we wrap this thing up, I'd like to get a piece of advice or words of wisdom from each one of you folks for our listeners, related to the course or unrelated to the course, whatever you would like it to be. And Bishop, we can go ahead and start off with you, man. Put you in the hot.
Yeah. So I would say the biggest thing is, one, if you carry a gun, go ahead and train. Don't be that guy pulls it out the one time you really need it, because you're going to be living on a prayer. And the other thing I'll say about the class that was the biggest eye-opening thing for me was I had never really been to a class before where, minus a centrifuge class, where you take the stuff you learn and then you actually use it in sims. And man, when you use it in sims, it all comes together and you realize, okay, yeah, everything we have been learning it's been verified at this point. It works. It's repeatable. And to me, that is the biggest ticket right there, because you get confirmation that what you just paid for is 100% accurate and could possibly save your life one day. So like I said, if you carry a gun, get out and train. And if you have an RDS on it, take this class, because it's gonna elevate your game. Even if you've been shooting an RDS for a while, I guarantee you'll walk away with something from that class. So go ahead, sign up, spend your money.
Awesome. Love it. What about you, Blake?
Yeah, so since Bishop hit the get out and train thing, I guess I'll show a little bias here and say, so get out and train with Centrifuge. No, kind of the difference is this. This could be a Dano's way to run an RDS, but it's really not that. It's like one of you guys mentioned earlier. Centrifuge is kind of, their foundation is really just data-driven training, and it shows in their development of what they're putting out. It shows in the drills, and really what we should be looking at. And I always say it's really all of our jobs to teach each other, whether we're actively teaching or not. So what we should be looking at is what do our dudes need, and not Dan's way of doing it, but what are our dudes seeing in the field? And I think the best way we can do that is looking at analyzing data, finding trends, and then developing training to address those trends. And I think really Centrifuge is kind of pioneers in that. And it's good to see a lot of other guys are starting to utilize that as well when it comes to training development, and myself included. When I early on teaching firearms, I was like, hey, this is fun. Let's just do this, right? Let's get our guys to do this. And now it's more like, what kind of problems do they see, and how can I give them the highest probability of success? And this RDS program is exactly that. How can Centrifuge give the dudes the highest probability of success with an RDS pistol and program? So that's it. Get out and train, and train Centrifuge.
All right, Dan, I'll kick it over to you.
Well, since they've already hit on the get out and train, that's always one thing. And I'm a huge proponent for that. From instructor side of the house, man, keep fighting the good fight. Understand that. I hear all the time. Guys are like, man, I wish we had admin that would do this. And understand that I got to the place that I'm at with my department. One, one little step at a time. Understand that there will be setbacks, there will be obstacles, but the obstacle is the way. You're going to have to work around it, and you will reach the point. You will reach a point that you'll look back and be like, oh yeah, hey man, we finally achieved it, and we finally arrived. And that's just one baby step at a time, and keeping up that consistency, being that broken wheel. Eventually they'll find the money, and you start to bring more people into your cause. More people start to talk about it, and that's how you create a movement and affect change. So don't be frustrated if you feel like you're the lone crazy nut in your department trying to push this newfangled red dot sight kind of thing. Understand, like we have all been there, and it is one small step at a time, and we'll get there eventually. So keep fighting a good fight,
right,
and get out and train Centrifuge.
Centrifugetraining.com. Andy, what about you, man? Last thoughts?
So first thing I want to say, Dano, we'd like to invite you back on the VCQB course with a couple students on that as well. We can set that up. The reason being is, it's always been a thing for me, a scar. So Jeremy and I took a vehicle course a while back, and getting out of the vehicle, I shot the instructor's truck, and he was not very happy, and it was not a good situation. So I'd like to have you guys come back.
Here's the thing on that though, right? I got a rule. Don't put anything down range that you're not willing to get shot. And then, hey, if you have a student that's been having an issue on day 1 of training, and they're still having that issue on day 2 of training, maybe that's a sign that you're not reaching that student in the manner that they need to be.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, I've seen a lot of Will Petty videos, and I've seen a lot of holes in a lot of cars. I'm just saying. So
it's on purpose. Sometimes it's accidentally on purpose. But hey, man, the number one rule of training around vehicles is do not train around vehicles that you're not willing to put holes in.
Yeah,
it's going to happen, right? Like if you're doing the training appropriately, like you will have students make mistakes. They'll put rounds of those vehicles, and that, like, that's one. You know where you're at in the training curriculum, and it's a lesson learned. But if we're like, so that's the thing. Like I don't do live fire around active patrol cars that have to go back into the fleet. But that was also a lesson learned when we sent half of a spotlight down range and put a hole in an A-pillar.
That's exactly where mine was. But it made me a better shooter. I'll say that, because I ate some crow for it, and it made me a better shooter. But we'd like to have you come back and review that course as well. But beyond that, one thing I just want to say, and I know you guys probably hear it often, in the volatile world right now of law enforcement and the craziness we see on the media, legitimately from my heart to yours, I want to thank all three of you for what you do. It doesn't get said enough. I'm one of those weird guys that if I run into a law enforcement guy, or I'll see an old Vietnam vet with a hat on, and they walk by me and I say, hey, thanks for your service. So from my heart to yours, I really appreciate what you guys are doing. No joke. Things are not easy usually for that. So that's a big thing that I have. I agree with all three of you. We've all kind of repeated it. Get out, get some training. If you want to learn a red dot, get out and start learning it. Go to Centrifuge, find somebody that can get you on the right path of learning red dots. I've been shooting for a few years now, and man, I don't think I'll ever go back other than just making myself shoot irons just so I don't lose, both sides as an instructor, to be able to teach irons as well as red dot. But for me, red dot all day, go in the future. But thank all three of you for coming on. It was a great comeback for us. It's been a while since we've been on. And I'm actually looking forward to Jeremy getting on and getting this re-edited so I can actually go back out and re-listen to it. And then I'm going to write down, Dano, your qualification test at the end. And I suspect Jeremy and I will be doing that again in the short coming weeks out on the range.
Yeah, man, absolutely.
Definitely a class I look forward to getting into and taking here. I think this year's almost up, but hopefully in 2022. Centrifugetraining.com is where folks can go to find the calendar, the schedule of courses, and all that good stuff. Appreciate you guys appreciate having you guys on the podcast with us tonight. Remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection, it's your responsibility. Y'all stay safe, and we'll see you hopefully before too long.